Now, the monogastric is a simple stomach. That's a human, mouse, rat. And basically, they digest everything via enzymatic digestion. And then most of the nutrients absorbed within the small intestine. Now, we, on the other hand, have ruminants, and this is our cows, sheep, goats, and there are some pseudo-ruminants, but for the sake of this class, we're only going to worry about cows, sheep, and goats. They have four-part foregut, which is their stomach, and it's huge. And there's a reticulum, which would be up here on the front. Then we have the rumen, which is the large portion. The rumen contains microbes. So they are basically forming this fermentation vat that can break down structural carbohydrates. In this process, they produce what we call volatile fatty acids. And those acids are absorbed across the stomach, go into the portal system, straight into the liver where the energy can be used, sent through and used throughout the body. We then have an omasum. This is mostly important for water resorption, and it also just kind of moves some of the feed stuff through the system. And then it goes into the abomasum. And this is the true stomach, which means it is most similar to the monogastric stomach in terms of having some of the acids and the other sorts of digestion that take place similar to humans, pigs, etc. And from there, it goes into the small intestines. One thing I didn't hit on very well yesterday is that cows and sheep and ruminants are very unique in that they will consume food. It will go down through the esophagus into the reticulum. The reticulum has a honeycomb-like shape and works kind of like a net. So anything coming in, especially things that are big and heavy, will fall directly into this pouch or pocket. The cow, behavior-wise, will spend all its time in the field taking food, wrapping up, eating it as fast as it can, and shoving it down its throat. Then, since it is a prey animal, it will go till it feels safe, and then it will decide to chew that food. And what it does is it regurgitates the food into its mouth, and then will sit and do what we call ruminating, which is where it chews. And I'll show you a video of this when we talk about digestion in general, but this is just a brief introduction to how food is moved through a ruminant stomach. Once it ruminates, there's a lot of saliva added that helps break down the feed stuff even more, and then it will go back into stomach. If it's still too big, some of the particles will fall down, but mostly it'll go back into the rumen. And this is where the microbes are able to ferment that food, break it down, and release various carbohydrates, which are going to be sugars and glucose for energy, as well as create those volatile fatty acids that can be used as energy in the cow. Once the digesta, which is just referring to the feed stuff that is moving through the digestive tract, leaves the rumen, it goes into the omasum, which is kind of like leaf-like folds, and it just works it through till it goes into the abomasum. Here, there will be some more digestion, but really not very much relative to the rumen. And then the digesta will continue into the small intestines. The things that kind of get absorbed in the small intestines are some of the vitamins and nutrients that do not get absorbed in the rumen, as well as those that kind of just miss the rumen and kind of fall out or keep going. Also, those microbes in the stomach or in the rumen, they eventually die. And so those microbes, once they die, they get passed out of the tract, and those actually become another source of energy and nutrition for the cow as they digest further as they go throughout the tract. So ruminant stomachs are actually quite interesting. Again, this is just the figure I showed. The left side of the animal is basically all rumen. The right side is where we find the majority of the rest of the tracts. Once it leaves the foregut, it goes into the intestines, which is the midgut and the hindgut. And what we see here in this picture is it coming out of the stomach. This is a dog, and so it's a monogastric animal. It comes out of the stomach into the small intestines, all the way around, and then at this point, we'll see this structure, all of them will turn into the large intestines. Now, the small intestines has three portions. The first part is what we call the duodenum. The second part, which is this middle major part, this is the jejunum, and the last part up here is the ileum. Now, the large intestines have various portions as well. There's the cecum, which is kind of a blind sac, and it also serves as a good boundary or a point where the digestive tract changes from being the small intestine to the large intestine. So we have the cecum. In some species, it does have microbial fermentation that occurs similar to the rumen in the cow and sheep. Then we have the colon, which is the main part. And we'll have ascending, transverse, and descending, which is just three different portions. Excuse me. But it's all the colon. It goes into the rectum, and then here at 11, this is going to be, well, at the very end is going to be the anus. 11, they have it labeled something differently. All right. Now, the digestive tracts can look very different. This is actually solely showing the large intestines for each of the animals. Now, and you can see there are a tremendous amount of differences, so I'm going to go over them. This one is a carnivore. This would be simply a dog. And what we have is, this is the ileum, so a piece of the small intestine coming in. This tiny little sac in the carnivore, that is the cecum. And then it goes into the colon, which is ascending, transverse, and descending, down into the rectum and the anus. So there's not a lot of activity happening here in the cecum of a carnivore. Next, we have swine. That's what the SU is. And again, we have right here is the ileum coming in to the cecum. Cecum, still very, very small, relatively in swine, not all that active. Then it goes into the spiral of a large intestine, part of the colon. It spirals back up, and then there's an ascending, transverse, and descending colon. And so the spiral colon is actually very unique to swine. Next, then we have ruminants. So this is going to be cows and sheep. We have yet a little bit larger in terms of the cecum, a little bit of activity occurring there, but still not very much activity in terms of fermentation. From here, we have this, well, it's basically a different kind of spiral for ruminants, and this is also very unique to ruminants as well. This is part of the colon, and then again, the ascending, transverse, and descending colon into the rectum. Finally, though, this is the one that's very interesting in terms of the hindgut. And again, the large intestines is hindgut. So foregut's the stomach area, midgut's the small intestine, hindgut is the large intestine. And so down here, this is the ileum, the small intestine coming into the large intestine. This big baby alien looking kind of figure, this is the cecum. It's ginormous on a horse, and that's because horses are what we refer to as hindgut fermenters. That means that a lot of their feed, especially the structural carbohydrates, they pass through their monogastric stomach, but then once they get down to the large intestines, a lot of the forages, a lot of the food will be hung up in this very large blind sac where it can undergo the microbial fermentation, like we talked about, that occurs in the rumen of the cow. So horses, they're monogastrics. They have the one simple stomach, but then they have this very, very large cecum. And this is how they have evolved and adapted to be able to consume the structural carbohydrates and forages that we typically feed them. Once it leaves the cecum, again, they have their own uniquely defined colon into basically the different parts of the colon into the rectum and the anus. So again, Horses, they are what we call hindgut fermenters. We'll talk about that more and more throughout the course though. Right, we spoke a little bit about dentition yesterday. We have the different kinds of teeth: incisors, canines, premolars, and molars, similar for us as well. These are dental formulas for some of the domestic species. I do not require you to know those. What I do want to point out though is that there's no canines in our ruminant or herbivore species, so sheep and cow here. And they actually don't even have incisors on the upper teeth. So you can see in the sheep here, there's just this dental pad or dental plate, because they don't have to, they don't need those teeth. They'll go out there and they'll break off, or they'll kind of, basically they're breaking off the grass and then just shove it in their mouth as far as they can. And then when they come back and ruminate, their mouths are just kind of grinding on their back teeth, which is their molars and premolars. So there's no need for canines. There's no need for upper incisors. There are some other organs associated with the digestive system. We have the liver. Liver is important for bioproduction, protein, fat, and carbohydrate metabolism, etc. Just know that the liver is very, very important, and it has a lot of metabolic functions. The pancreas is another organ. It sits right up next to the duodenum. It's a very, it's very important for exocrine functions to help with digestion. And this is actually associated with regulation of blood sugar, especially when we think about humans that have diabetes. The pancreas is a very big player in that. Next, we have the gallbladder. The gallbladder stores and concentrates bile from the liver, and it empties its waste directly into the duodenum, which is that part of the small intestine. And an important fact, though I'll probably never ask you about it, is that the horse does not actually have a gallbladder. All right, respiratory system. The major parts of the respiratory system are the nose. Functions are olfaction, humidification, and cleansing of air. So in the nose, we also have basically a lot of space in our heads throughout our sinuses, and that is for us to have this ability to humidify the air and also to clean it as it comes through. Another function, though, is to warm up the air. So when it's cold, our body needs to warm up the heat before it hits your lungs. Warm it up. So I said that very odd. The body needs to warm it so that it is warmer when it hits our lungs. All right. The larynx is simply an organ that facilitates the passage of air. The trachea is the tube. So you can see in this picture, the trachea is coming down in. This is, again, right here, representation of the trachea. The pleura is just the membranes. It sits on the outside of the lungs, lining them. And then we have the lungs themselves. And the lungs are broken down into different lobes, which you can see. Different lobes. They have basically bronchus that go all the way to bronchioles, bronchiolus, all these different definitions. And what it is just these, basically this kind of web, or basically just kind of little tubes that branch out and branch out and branch out until they get smaller and smaller within the lungs. And it's facilitating gas exchange because it's creating a lot of surface area for gases that you breathe in to come in, interact with the lungs, get directly into the bloodstream, etc. All right, cardiovascular system. So the major components of this are the heart, blood vessels, spleen. The purpose of the spleen is to store red blood cells, not to make them. Keep that in mind, because some people do actually make that mistake quite often. Then we have the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system is associated with the, the lymphatic system is associated with the immune system. And so lymph nodes are basically just lymph tissue, and they can have different shapes within the body. They can be ovoid or bean shaped. and they serve as a barrier to the spread of infection or tumors. Because in the immune system, things that come from a certain area will drain directly into that lymph node before it gets sent into the rest of the body. It's important to note that a circulatory system is essential to any organ that requires delivery of metabolic fuel and the removal of waste. So these are the two major functions of the cardiovascular system: to deliver metabolic fuel and to remove waste. Right, the heart itself is the main organ of the cardiovascular system. It will continuously pump blood in a rhythmic manner and has 4 chambers. It's the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. And then in the middle, it's separated by this internal septum. So if we wanted to trace blood as it goes through the body, the blood is going to come from the lungs into the left atrium and then into the left ventricle. And then it's going to be pumped out to the rest of the body. Then once it comes back from the body, it's deoxygenated and it comes through the right atrium, right ventricle, and then it's pumped out the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs. So basically from the body, left atrium, left ventricle, I am butchering this. Basically from the lungs, left atrium, left ventricle to the body, from the body, right atrium, right ventricle to the lungs. And that is how the heart is going to move blood. This is going to be for all mammalian species. The heart in the livestock, similar to us, sits slightly to the left, and it's going to sit very low. So if you've ever seen a vet take or listen to the heartbeat of a dog in a vet in an exam, it's going to go right below, or basically kind of listen in the armpit of the left side of the dog. And that's because it can most easily access the heart. Now, once we have our blood vessels in the periphery, we have different kinds. The arteries are the ones that go away, so arteries go away, and veins come back towards the heart. Then we have the capillaries and the lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes. Basically, they get smaller. So there's the aorta, or the main artery, and then it's going to get smaller into smaller arteries, arterioles. So this is still carrying oxygenated blood. Then it's going to come down in the capillaries, and the capillaries are present within the different tissues. In these capillaries, it's going to transfer, or nutrients and oxygen are going to be exchanged. And then in that period is when it's going to become deoxygenated. And then it'll come out through the venules, the veins, larger veins, and then the vena cava, which is the largest vein that takes the deoxygenated blood back to the heart. Do you all have any questions at this moment? Perfect. Moving on to the nervous system. The nervous system is important for every animal on this planet so that it can react to its environment as well as be able to survive. The major functions are to store, integrate, and initiate responses to various stimuli. And it also functions as a communication network. There are 2 different major structures. There are the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord, whereas the peripheral nervous system is comprised of all of the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves, and all other nerves involved. So any of them that you're going to see that comes out into the limbs, that's all part of the peripheral nervous system. So it's basically the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord, and then we have other. All right, the spinal cord itself is situated within the middle of the vertebrae. You can see it here, as well as in the middle of the various vertebrae here on the right. And it sends signals out. Then they are going to communicate with the rest of the body. But basically, it's protected in the shell of our spinal cord, our spine, for protection. And that's going to be one of the major components of the central nervous system, in addition to the brain. We don't ever want infection to be in our spinal cord because it's a direct shunt to the brain. And we as humans or animals can die almost immediately. What we're going to do is watch this brief video. LeVar, do you have class today? At 1?
No, it was just on Monday.
All right, perfect. Does anyone else have class at 1 today? In person? Nope. All right, good. Then we're fine on time. All right, so we're going to watch this quick video, and on your notes page, I want you to draw and label the neuron as discussed in the video, and it's going to talk you through how these communications are sent throughout the body. It's Khan Academy. If you've never used them, you should, because they're phenomenal. Man, I might have to reshare this.
We could have a debate about what.
Grayson, can you hear that? No? I'm not sure why we're in another wood.
I can.
Okay, perfect. I don't know. We're just going to go with these
The most interesting cell in the human body is, but I think easily the neuron would make the top 5. And if not just because the cell itself is interesting, the fact that it essentially makes up our brain and our nervous system and is responsible for the thoughts and our feelings and maybe for all of our sentience, I think would easily make it the top 1 or 2 cells. So what I want to do is first just show you what a neuron looks like. And of course, this is kind of the perfect example. This isn't what all neurons look like. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how it performs its function, which is essentially communication, essentially transmitting signals across its length depending on the signals it receives. So if I were to draw a neuron, let me pick a better color. So let me draw, I'm going to make my brush size a little bit thinner. So let's say I have a neuron. It looks something like this. So in the middle you have your soma, and then from the soma, so let me draw the nucleus. Try my best. So this is a nucleus, just like any cell's nucleus. And then the soma is considered the body of the neuron. And then the neuron has these little things sticking out from it that keep branching off. Maybe they look something like this. I don't want to spend too much time just drawing the neuron, but you've probably seen drawings like this before. And these branches off of the soma of the neuron, off of its body, these are called dendrites. Dendrites. And they can keep splitting off like that. I want to do a fairly reasonable drawing, so I'll spend a little time doing that. One last dendrite, just like that. So these right here, these are dendrites. And these tend to be, and nothing is always the case in biology, sometimes different parts of different cells perform other functions, but these tend to be where the neuron receives its signal. And we'll talk more about what it means to receive and transmit a signal in this video and probably in the next few. So this is where it receives the signal. And then, so this is the dendrite. This right here is the soma. Soma means body. This is the body of the neuron. And then we have kind of you can almost view it as a tail of the neuron. It's called the axon. The axon A neuron could be, a reasonably normal sized cell, although there is a huge range. But the axons can be quite long. They could be short. Sometimes in the brain you might have very small axons, but you might have axons that go down the spinal column or that go along one of your limbs, or if we're talking about a dinosaur, go along one of a dinosaur's limbs. So the axon can actually stretch several feet. Not all neurons' axons are several feet, but they could be. And this is really where a lot of the distance of the signal gets traveled. So let me draw the axon. So the axon will look something like this. And at the end, it ends at the axon terminal, where it can connect to other dendrites, or maybe to other types of tissue or muscle, if the point of this neuron is to tell a muscle to do something. So at the end of the axon, you have the axon terminal right there. Do my best to draw it. It's like that. Let me label it. So this is the axon. This is the axon terminal. And you'll sometimes hear the word, the point at which the soma, or the body of the neuron, connects to the axon is often referred to as the axon hillock. Or maybe you can kind of view it as kind of a lump. It starts to form the axon. So it's the axon hillock. And then we're going to talk about, actually I think there's a C there. We're going to talk about how the impulses travel, and a huge part in what allows them to travel efficiently are these insulating cells around the axon. These insulating cells around the axon. We're going to talk about this in detail and how they actually work, but it's good just to have the anatomical structure first. So these are called Schwann cells. Schwann cells. And they're covering, they make up the myelin sheath. So this covering, this insulation at different intervals around the axon, this is called the myelin sheath. So Schwann cells make up the myelin sheath. I'll do one more just like that. So I'll say Schwann cells or myelin sheath. And then these little spaces between the myelin sheath, just so we have all of the terminology from, so we know the entire anatomy of the neuron. These are called the nodes of Ranvier. Nodes of Ranvier. I guess they're named after Ranvier. Maybe he was the guy who looked and saw they have these little slots here where you don't have myelin sheaths. So these are the nodes of Ranvier. So the general idea, as I mentioned, is that you get a signal here, and we're going to talk more about what the signal means. And then that signal gets actually the signals can be summed. So you might have one little signal right there, another signal right there, and then you'll have maybe a larger signal there and there. And that the combined effects of these signals get summed up, and they travel to the hillock. And if they're large enough, they're going to trigger an action potential on the axon, which will cause a signal to travel down the balance of the axon. And then over here, it might be connected via synapses to other dendrites or muscles. And we'll talk more about synapses, and those might help trigger other things. And so you're saying, well, what's triggering these things here? Well, this could be the terminal end of other neurons' axons, like in the brain. This could be some type of sensory neuron. This could be on a taste bud someplace. So when a salt molecule somehow can trigger it, or a sugar molecule, or this might be some type of stretch sensor. It could be a whole bunch of different things, and we'll talk more about the different types of neurons.
So it's basically just a neuron cell. And when we look at it in the body, it goes two different directions, or we have two different kinds of neuron cells. We have afferent neurons, and those are the ones that when we receive that stimulus in, say, the knee, it's going to travel to the spinal cord, to the central nervous system, be processed, and then it's going to send a signal back through an efferent neuron. And so afferent goes towards the central nervous system, efferent comes away. An easy way to remember this is that afferent causes an affect, which with an A. The efferent is the effect with an E. But that also requires you to know the difference between affect and effect. So you're on your own there. All right. Perfect. So if we move on, we look briefly at the reproductive system. I'm going to move very quickly right now because we're out of time. And so we have the brain and we have reproductive organs. They both come together and they are closely intertwined with both the endocrine system and the nervous system. We'll talk more about the reproductive system overall when we talk about reproduction. So right now, do not worry about the female or the male. We will dive into these when we talk about them in 2 weeks. We then have the endocrine system. We'll learn more about it as well when we talk about reproduction. But it is so basically in the endocrine system, hormones are secreted into the blood, the lymph, or just the tissue fluid, and they communicate with target organs. Excuse me. Each gland is very different and there are distinct functions depending on what we're looking at. And the endocrine system very much regulates reproduction. Now, it is associated as well with maintaining internal environments, and it will do this by closely interacting with the nervous system. And then also allows for responses to external stimuli. The endocrine system has glands that are scattered throughout the entire body, but they are all united by this one structure in the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus releases two major components of neurons, those that are releasing hormones, which turn things on within the body, and then those that are inhibiting, which turn things off. The hypothalamus communicates with the pituitary gland, specifically the anterior pituitary, and through the pituitary, it's able to exert effects and control over various functions throughout the body. So basically, the hypothalamus receives stimuli and then is able to coordinate functions across the entire body. All right, we have the urogenital system. This is associated with excretion. With this, we have the kidneys. They're paired. There are two of them. They have various shapes depending on the species. And the overall function of them is to filter, have some endocrine actions, and then they regulate fluid and metabolites within the body. We have the ureters. These are tubes that connect between the kidneys and the bladder. The bladder, which you all know, is this expandable organ that stores urine until we go to relieve ourselves. And then the urethra, which is what carries the urine from the bladder to the outside of the body. These are the various shapes that kidneys can come in. Top left is a dog. Middle's a pig. This heart shape is a horse. Hearts are very unique, or horses are very unique. And this is the kidney of a cow. It's got this lobular shape and it has these deep fissures, which are these deep kind of dips that occur. Now the kidneys, well, this is basically looking at the urogenital system of the dog and the cow. And you can see the right one is almost always going to be elevated on any of the species compared to the left. So this is a dog, it's a schematic. So we have the kidneys, the ureters, which are leading from the kidneys to the bladder. And then the urethra will be on the other side, which you can't see. If we look at the feline, this is where it has been dissected out. We have kidney, right kidney, left kidney. Ureters are coming down through the middle here, and the bladders down in here. And then on the right side, we have a canine radiograph, which is, again, right kidney, left kidney, then the ureters down into the bladder. And then we have our special senses, and there are 5 of these. We're not going to go into in-depth in any of them, except for you will look into the eyeball during your lab. So the 5 senses we have are sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. My 5-year-old knows these in school, so I am very confident that you all know what these are. It's the same for the livestock species.